In this Maker video, we're going to show you how to add switches to both meters that will control their scale and also their alarming conditions. This is the My interface, and if you haven't viewed the previous videos, I recommend that you do so that you know what we've done up to now and also how to load the My interface so that we can modify it with the switches. Up to now, we've added two horizontal meters that measure analog channels 0 and 1. And we've also added alarm settings to both meters so that their individual audio alarms will go off when the analog signals go above or below what they're set to. In this video, we're going to add a slider switch to allow us to turn the alarm function on or off so that it doesn't keep beeping or chirping at us when we don't want it to. We're also going to add a momentary push button switch to set the meter's scale. Right now it's going from 0 to 250. So we're going to add a switch to set it to the scale of whatever the Y scale happens to be at the time. Now we did this already in our alarming meters interface and also in our 4 gauges interface. So you should take a look at those videos in the interface video series to see how it works. Anyway, we'll show you how it works in this video too. And finally, we're going to add what we call event code. We're going to add event code to the switches to make them do what we want, like turn the alarms on and off and set the meters to the Y scale. Now this video will introduce you to the event code, which is at the heart of making all the switches, meters, LEDs, and so forth do their thing in MakerPlot. We'll follow up with additional videos in this Maker series on event code, so it's important to the operation of the controls. Let's start by coming up here to our toolbars, and let's click on the hammer toolbar, which brings up our object editor. And we want to choose one of the image buttons that's in our object editor controls 2 pull down menu. And we have several choices. We have a choice of rectangular push buttons that are momentary, and the rectangular push buttons in this case don't have any borders. Below them we have a series of rocker switches which look interesting, but we want to label our push button, and the rocker switches aren't really amenable to labeling, so we'll avoid them for this particular example. And below the rocker switches we have 4 other push button switches with borders that I want to use for this example. And I also want to be able to distinguish the colors of our buttons so that we know which meters we're affecting. So I'm going to choose a blue color. I'm going to left click on it and you'll see the X come up, and let's just drag that over under the first meter about here on the left side and release it. And it comes up as OBJ61. This is just MakerPlot way of identifying a particular object. Don't worry about that label, we'll change it. Let's also come back here and click on the green button and bring it under the meter. Alright, so now we have 2 push buttons, and if we click on the push button, it does make a sound, but it doesn't do anything. So we're going to add the event code eventually to that to change the scales of the meters. Now what we want to do is bring some switches over, slider switches in particular. We'll come down here and we'll choose one of the 4 horizontal slider switches. It looks like it comes in red, green, yellow, and blue, so we have chosen blue and green. Let's choose a blue slider switch and bring it under meter number 1. And let's choose a green slider switch and bring it under meter number 2. And notice that what I did was just simply left click on the meter and drag it to where it's at right now. And of course it's not positioned correctly, but nevertheless we'll be able to do that very soon. Now since we have a blue and green theme for our push buttons and slider switches, let's continue that blue and green theme by changing the background colors of the meters to match. And what we can do is just come over here and right click in the meter and come down to color. And let's say we're going to have blue here, so let's choose light blue for this meter. Okay, it went off. That's what we want to prevent with that control just below it. Come down to the second meter, which monitors channel 1. Right-click on it, come down to color, and we will choose green. Now what we have are the meters in green and blue, and we have the switches to match the colors of green and blue. So now we have a complete coordinated set of meters and switches. The next thing we want to do is size and move the switches. So I'm going to position my mouse cursor over the push button switch. I'm holding the shift key down and I'm right clicking on the object. Now I'm going to just simply use my arrow keys to move the switch just below the top meter. And we see up here that our left coordinate is 81 and our top coordinate is 63. Our width is set at 9 and our height is set at 7. That looks about right, so we'll leave it at that. What we also want to do is change the label of the switch from OBJ61 to something more representative. And we can do that by just clicking here in this box and changing OBJ61 to Y, let's say, dash axis adjust. Okay, that's spread out a bit farther that we want. So let's also come down and change the font size. Font size is a 10. Let's change it to an 8 and see what happens. We'll key in an 8, hit the enter key, and that looks perfect. Y-axis adjust. Let's do the same thing for the other push button switch. Come down to it, push the shift key, right click, and now we can use our arrow keys once again to move the object just underneath the bottom meter. We want to change the name from OBJ62 to Y-axis adjust as well. And as we did before, we want to change the font size from 10 to 8. There we go. Now that we have our push button switches arranged, let's work on our slider switches. Let's start with the one under the top meter. Once again, pushing the shift key, right clicking on our mouse key, and now what we can do here is move it up to where it ought to be. We'll use the arrow keys to do it that grossly. And what we also want to do is change its size, make it a bit longer and perhaps deeper. So come up here to the width control, and now we can use either our arrow keys or enter a width into the text box. Let's use our arrow keys. And in this case, I'm going to fine-tune our arrow keys by holding the shift key down and then using the arrow keys to move the slider control. So I'm moving the slider control to make it basically about the same size as the push button control. That was holding the shift key down and moving the arrow keys. Let's do the same thing with the one below it. Hold our shift key down to begin with, right click, and that brings up our object editor for that particular control. And now we want to grossly position it just using our arrow keys. We're going to fine-tune it by coming here to the width area, clicking on the width area, and this will allow us to control the height and the width using our arrow keys. Push the shift key down and use the arrow keys to adjust the size of our slider button. That should do it. Now that we have our switches positioned, let's just click on them to see what they do. Well, they seem to work, but they don't really do anything. And the reason they don't do anything is because there's no event code attached to them. In other words, there's nothing to link the control switches to the meters above them. And that's what we really want to do in this next part of the video. We want to be able to link our push button and slider switches to the meters above them. And to do that, first of all, we have to know what the names of the meters are, because we need to address the meters by name. To do that, I'm going to hold the Shift key down and I'm going to right click on the top meter. And I'm going to notice that the top meter's name is GAU_53. So let's keep that in mind. That's the name of the top meter. That's GAU_53. Similarly, let's come down with our cursor and position it on the bottom meter. Push the Shift key, right click on it, and look at the name for the bottom meter. The name for the bottom meter is GAU_53_54. And as you'll recall in our previous video, we used the duplicate feature to be able to create this second meter. And this is MakerPlot's way of naming a duplicate control, basically in the next number sequence. So those are our names. Now let's come up here to our blue push button switch, push the Shift key down, and right click on it. And we notice that we have below it something called event code in our box. What we're going to do is use event code to make the meter react to the push button switch to adjust it to the Y-axis. And let's put the event code in right now. I'm just going to do it, and I'll explain what I'm going to do later, but I'm just going to put the event code in. It's going to be !POBJ, which is the plot object command in a MakerPlot. And then I'm going to type in the name of the meter just above it, which again is GAU_53.max. All right, this is going to set the maximum value for the scale. And I'm going to set that equal to open paren AMAX close paren. Okay, hit the enter key. Let's do it for the minimum. Exclamation POBJ GAU50_53.min equal to AMIN, and hit the enter key. But before we go any further, let's test our event code out. So let's drop our object editor. Let's change our Y-axis. Let's just double our Y-axis from 250 to 500. Let's come up and click on our Y-axis adjust and see if our meter goes from 0 to 250 to 0 to 500. Hey, there it did. Our event code worked. What we did in our event code, and again I'm going to hold the Shift key down, right click on it. What we did with our event code is actually link our momentary push button switch to our meter above it. And we've linked it so that whenever it is clicked, the following instructions take place, and that is we're going to set the meter maximum to the Y maximum scale and the meter minimum to the Y minimum scale. Let's do the same for the bottom Y adjust push button switch. I'm pushing the Shift key. I place my cursor over the switch, right click on it. Let's come in here and enter the event code for the meter above it. And we'll start by saying exclamation point POBJ space GAU_53_54.max in this case, equal to open paren AMAX close paren, enter, exclamation point POBJ GAU_53_54.min equal AMIN close paren, and hit the enter key again. Let's test our Y-axis adjust for the bottom meter. Click on it, and in fact, we changed from 250 to 500. Let's make sure that it works. Let's just crank our y-axis up to 1,000, and yes, indeed, it goes to 1,000. Let's double check the one above it, the y-axis control above it. Right now, the top meter is 0 to 500. Let's click it. Indeed, it goes from 0 to 1,000. So I'm going to drop the y-axis back down to 250, and we'll change our meters back down to 0 to 250 each. Now we have entered the event code for our y-axis adjust. Now what we need to do is enter the same event code or equivalent event code for our two slider switches to be able to turn the alarms on and off. Let's start with a slider switch under the top meter. I'm pushing the shift key down and I'm right clicking on it, and I'll bring up the object editor for it. Let's enter the event code, which is !POBJ space GAU underscore 53.ALARM, that's alarm, equal to open paren HSW underscore 63, close paren, and enter. Now we came up with the HSW 63 or underscore 63 based on the name of our slider switch, which is just above it. Now let's check it out. Okay, when it's on, our alarm condition is on because we see that our channel 0 turns to red. And if we switch it off, it goes to off, and then our channel 0 goes to white, which is the color of the background numbers. So this is now going to control our alarm situation. Let's do the same thing for the slider switch below on the second meter. Holding the shift key down, right clicking on it, coming in here to the event code, exclamation point POBJ space GAU underscore 53 underscore 54 dot ALARM equals open paren, in this case HSW underscore 64, that's the name of this switch. Hit the enter key. Let's check it out. Yes, indeed, it works as well. So now we have both slider switches controlling the meters above them for the alarm conditions. We're almost done. So now what we want to do is save our work. So we come up here to the wrench icon, click on it, and that brings up our macro builder. Come inside the macro builder pull-down menu, click on the wrench icon a couple of times. That will load in all the changes that we made with the switches that we added. Then we want to save our work by coming here and just clicking on the save icon. That will save my interface to the file. And let's check it out by coming over to the stop sign icon. Click on the stop sign icon, and we're asked to be sure we've saved our work first. Yes, we have, and we're going to run our macro by answering yes. And here it comes loading again. So we've saved our work. Let's drop our macro builder and go on. To wind up our video, let's make sure that everything is working by plotting some data. So come down here and click on our rocker switch to start data. Now in this case, our alarm meters are all on, and we can hear them. The beeping is for the second alarm meter for channel 1, and the piercing sound is for channel 0, which is the alarm meter on top. Alright, let's turn them off. Okay, they're both off now. So now we have affected the fact that we can control our meter alarm situation with these two slider switches, and we can control the scale of our meters with the value of our y-axis. Let's check that again. Let's double our y-axis to 500. Click on our y-adjust, and indeed the first meter goes to 500. Let's try it for the bottom meter, and it goes to 500 as well. So that about ends this particular video. What we've done in this video is we've added two controls, one to control the y-axis and one to control the alarm conditions for our 2 meters. And we've also introduced you to event code that allows these particular switches to be able to affect other controls within the MakerPlot environment. In future videos, we're going to get much more into the event codes so that you can really appreciate how to get the most out of MakerPlot.